ready to record? Should have probably asked that first. All right. My name is Galipeau. I'm the CEO of Repoint Technologies. Today we're here to talk about accessibility and 508 compliant websites. To be honest, I only throw 508 compliant into the title of this so people know what it is. It's really accessibility. One thing I want you to remember throughout all of this, in the accessibility community, they refer to it as accessibility. Only in the government, 508 refers to a law that tries to tell you how to implement accessibility that was written over 10 years ago. They just revised it recently. So just remember, accessibility is the key word you're going to keep hearing over and over throughout this speech. Before we start, actually, let's go a little bit about me. The CEO of Repoint Technologies. I used to be the chief application architect for the United States Department of Treasury. So I was a government employee where I learned a lot about misconceptions of accessibilities, but that was only 3 years of my life. I've actually been a SharePoint consultant for 16 plus years now. I've been working with it since SharePoint 2001. I was actually hired at Treasury to help them get their Treasury platform up and running as the application architect there. I've been working with accessible websites also for my whole career. It was at Treasury where I learned there's a lot of misconceptions, even from the government people that are responsible for saying a site's supposed to be accessible, on what an accessible site really is. So one of my goals lately has been to try to change those misconceptions, teach people how to make accessible sites, teach people there's no such thing as a 508 compliant site. It doesn't exist. There's levels of how accessible your site is, and that's what we're trying to achieve. So what is accessibility? A product is accessible if people with disabilities can navigate it, understand the content, and interact with its functionality, right? So we think about different disabilities that people can have, and they need to be able to use a site just like you. Think of it like a ramp to a building for wheelchair access. That's just, everyone understands, that just makes common sense, right? It's the same thing with web. Just because someone has a disability doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to use your website. And you should always be thinking about that when you're developing code, when you're writing HTML, even when you're evaluating COTS products used in the industry. SharePoint took a huge hit early on in its versions because it was not accessible at all. And it's gotten much better over the years because the government has adopted it more and more in COTS products. It's also important, why are we talking about this subject in a SharePoint presentation when it's a COTS product? We were just talking about this a second ago. I built this presentation for .NET DC, for people that are writing .NET code. And I've used it in the SharePoint world now because we are writing more code in SharePoint now than ever before. You have the SharePoint framework. You have the SharePoint add-in model. You just have the modern web parts that you can build now. SharePoint is becoming this tool where you use the framework and you build client-side. And client-side is the key here, components to interact with the website. So what is client-side? HTML and JavaScript. When you talk about accessibility, it's all about HTML and JavaScript, right? Server-side stuff doesn't have a lot to do with it unless it's rendering client-side, right? So it's very important nowadays in the new modern SharePoint world. Now, more important than what accessibility is why. Why should we be doing this? We already talked about, let's just jump right to number 2. It's the right thing to do. Forget about any law out there, any reason you should be doing this. It's the right thing to do. You should not discriminate against people in any way, and your code can do that. But it is the law too. So even if you don't believe it's the right thing to do, or just say, hey, that's too hard, it's an actual law called the American with Disabilities Act. It was also a Rehabilitation Act that specifically had Section 508. This is key. 508 is the Rehabilitation Act of 1998. Americans with Disability Act was an act in 1990 that just said you have to do this, right? Why is this important? People think I only have to build accessible websites in the government. That is a complete misconception. You have to do it in the public sector too. I don't know if a lot of people know this. It doesn't get a lot of press. Peapod and Netflix both settle cases. So companies have been sued that are not government related, and they settle huge class action lawsuits. Even if you're not working government websites, you still have to do this. You have to think of it from that angle. Other than security, it's one of the only things that you can really get sued for doing incorrectly. Now, to be quite honest, they only go after people that are doing a really bad job, but still, you don't want to do it. So what is our goal? So the goal of accessibility is universal design that is integrated and equal, right? The reason I like to share this quote is we're not trying to make websites that work differently for people with disabilities. We're trying to make the same exact website work the same exact way for people with disabilities. Now, there is a little caveat in the law that says if there's just something that's impossible to do, you're allowed to have another way to do it for someone with a disability. A good example of that, it comes a lot with charts and graphs. So, like I said, I worked at Treasury.gov. We had a lot of data-driven charts and graphs, and they were just almost impossible to make accessible. So in that case, you can point people to like the raw data so they can parse it themselves through Excel, like financial data and stuff like that. But it's very, very rare you want to do that. It's only if it's just not a possibility, right? So your end intent is to make the website you're building for someone with no disabilities work the same for someone with disabilities. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to achieve here. Okay, let's go for a little overview. Web accessibility refers to an inclusive practice, making websites usable. So when we talk about disabilities, I've used the word disabilities a lot, I haven't gone into what we're trying to accomplish here. It's people with visual, motor, auditory, seizures, and cognitive and intellectual, right? So a lot of people, when they think about accessibility, they're only thinking the visual or auditory aspect, right? The other aspects are just as important. Now, there's less stuff that can make a website not work for the other things, but you still have to think about it. Motor's a big one, people miss a lot, and cognitive intellectual is actually a big one. Do you know that just by making a bad design, you can not be accessible? Like, if you made a design that like people just couldn't understand how to use, that's kind of a disability. That's kind of going against a disability with cognitive and intellectual disabilities to not be able to intuitively use the site. So I actually had that the other day. It was actually one of my projects still at Treasury, even though I'm consulting there now. The designers came with the design, and our 508 expert looked at it and said, "You can't do it like that. That looks like a tab, but it's not a tab." And I didn't even think about it. And I'm someone who prides myself in knowing all these things, and someone else caught it. But because the designers made a tab, what they basically designed us was a tab that had a wizard functionality, but it looked like a tab. And our 508 person said, "No, you can't do that, because people with cognitive and intellectual disabilities aren't going to be able to figure this out. It's not usable." So, because I was trying to argue that this was weird, like just from a pure design point of view. I'm glad the 508 person jumped in and said, "Okay, I got your back, Greg. No, it's an actual 508 issue. They actually can't do this." So it's important. So the W3C, does everyone know what the W3C is? World Wide Web Consortium? They're basically the people that tell us how to write HTML. They kind of put all the laws out there. You can actually validate your website against all their rules and everything. Well, they have accessibility guidelines out there, and these are the highlight bullet points of their accessibility guidelines. The one that almost everyone knows, equivalent and alternative text. So this is like the very common one. You have an image. Obviously, someone that can't see your website can't see what the image is. So you put something called an alt tag on it, and it tells them what the image is through a screen reader, right? You can't rely on color. This is one I see missed a lot. There are colorblind people out there. You can never rely purely on color. There's always got to be, if you're going to use color for something, there's always got to be a secondary way for someone to know. Think of a stoplight, right? Yes, red, yellow, green. But red's always at the top, yellow's always in the middle, green's always at the bottom. That's how there's two different ways to recognize when to stop and when to go for people that couldn't see that color. Use markup and style sheets. So, HTML is called markup. Style is put in a style sheet. You keep them separate. Can't tell you how many websites I have to go fix. I'm just pulling developers' codes out and saying, why would you do it this way? Style, markup, two different things. Your markup, your page should just like reach straight down, right? Styles would make things like kind of float to the right and move all around in the right spot on the page. Natural language, another one missed a lot. When you're writing words, you're writing content for a page, it's got to be real clear, concise. Use what we call natural language. Is actually, how many people here work in some form of the government, consulting or anything? Yeah, so there's actually laws in almost every agency. They actually have groups in almost every agency that have natural language experts that talk about how to do natural language. Tables are a huge problem. We'll talk about this a little later when I show you some code. New technologies need to transform gracefully. So has anyone ever seen a website, you have a link to download this PDF and it always says to get Adobe, go here. That's an accessibility rule. because you can't assume people have Adobe on their computer. You have to tell them. Now, that's still the rule, but come on, everyone knows that nowadays. But as new technologies emerge, you have to think about it. Like if you're putting something that required Silverlight. Remember when Silverlight came out? You had to put something, here's where you go to get it if you don't have it, things like that. So. Time-sensitive content changes. You just have to be careful that things aren't changing based on time on the screen. The users have a way to control that. Content orientation, clear navigation, and documents. That's another thing that's very important with SharePoint. If anything, if you're not a developer, if you're not developing here, remember that documents you put in SharePoint have to be accessible too. Right? So if you're writing a Word document, it has to be accessible. If you're writing a PDF, it has to be accessible. Right? A lot of people forget about that, the documents we upload into SharePoint, they need to be accessible too. Okay, let's go through some of the accessibility principles. There's 4 principles of accessibility, and I think most people don't understand all these or don't think about all of them. Perceivable is the one that we really think of when we think of accessibility. Alternative text, assistive technologies can be used. So JAWS, we're going to talk about that later. That's what we call a screen reader. People that can't see, it speaks the words on the websites to them. Text and audio transcripts, remove reliance on shape. So the website is perceivable. It can be perceived by anyone with a disability. Operable means it can be used by anyone, right? So there's keyboard alternatives. Like let's say you couldn't use a mouse. There's a keyboard way to do everything. You don't have action timeouts on the screen without really letting people know. You eliminate auto redirects. You don't want blinking screens. I saw an interesting thing the other day on Twitter. Someone actually there was a well-known journalist that was a little, I can't remember if he was right or left, let's just say he was one at the fringe. And he was well known for having seizures, and someone actually on Twitter put a blinking image up just to trigger this person to have a seizure. It does work, so blinking images, never want them on a website. And alternative ways. So I can understand what I'm seeing, it's perceivable, I can use the site. And then there's, understandable. So multilingual, identification of multilingual sections, glossaries, page focus points, consistent functionality, it's intuitive. So you've built a good website. So usually this is more on the branding side, the people that are designing your site. So let's say I built a site and it had just like lots of crazy big words that no one understood. Let's say I'm in the financial industry. That's where glossaries really come into play that can help people understand what you're trying to say. It's also where the clear language comes into play. And it's robust, supports plugins, scripts, applets, accessible PDFs, and other file types. Okay, some important facts, and we're really quickly going to go through these. And by the way, we are going to get into code, so I'm going to show you how to do some of this stuff. It's not just all about why. 15 million people visual impaired, and that stat might be a little old by now. It's a few years old. I think it's even more now. 28 million people, some kind of hearing loss. And an important one is we talked about Netflix and Peapod, but the big one was in 2006 when Target got sued. That was one of the biggest class action lawsuits out there from an accessibility point of view. It's the gold standard of why you have to do this. Testing. Okay, so we're going through the overview, going through the boring parts so everyone understands. Accessibility is great, we have to do this, it's not a choice, it's something we have to do. The biggest problem with accessibility that I've noticed on the teams that I've run or government organizations that I've been in is testing. There's this misconception in the government world that there's some magical product out there that can test accessibility. It doesn't exist. And if you think that way, by the time you got there, if you wait to the end and test it, you're already never going to hit your goals anyways, right? So, how do we test? It's a process. So who here is familiar with agile development? Okay, agile development. You work in small sprints, you keep working, 2 to 3 weeks, you build some code, next test the code, let's give 2 to 3 weeks, and why do we do that? So you're always checking all the way through the process, not waiting to the end, finding an issue, and realizing you don't have the product you want. I think the same way about accessibility. This should be something the people working on the project should always be doing to some extent throughout the whole project. So Developers should have some tools in their tool bag to be helping them build accessible websites. Then you have testers that should have some tools to be able to test it, and there's different levels at each, right? So we're going to go through that a little bit. First of all, when you're building your site, it's always a good idea at some point, turn your images off, turn your sound off, set font sizes larger, take your screen and change with it, turn your screen to black and white resolution, try going through without a mouse, try just tabbing through your page and see if it actually works. These are some good things it takes 2 seconds to do as you're developing. Just give it a shot, right? And validate your site. So, there are tools on the market that can help you with 508. Now, are you going to be able to go to your boss and say, my site is 508 compliant, I use these tools, yes? No, you're not going to do that. These tools are going to help you find stuff, right? Let me show you real quick. So we're going to look at this one called Wave real quick. So, what I always like to do whenever I'm doing an accessibility presentation, why didn't this? Oh, okay. You're going to make me do it this way, aren't you? All right. I always like to take the conference website that I'm at and check if it's accessible during the conference. And I haven't checked this yet. So far, no conference has been accessible that I've checked. No conference website. Okay, what I did here is I downloaded a toolbar called Wave. Web Accessibility, I forget what the acronym is for. It's been around for a long time. There's a few good toolbars on the market. I'm just going to click it. And it's going to check for obvious issues on the page. It's not completely rendering. I think I'm having some internet issues. Usually, yeah, there we go. You get your list of issues on the page. So this is saying it's 28. And I never get freaked out by the amount of errors when you do this, right? You could have one error that repeated itself in a list 28 times, right? I had one page that came up with like 100 errors, but it was really one issue in our development because it just was in a repeatable list and the tool caught it all. Now, the tool's not perfect. It's gonna catch false positives, false negatives. It's your job to go through it and see the problem. Let's look at this real quick. I see that right there, that red. I'm gonna click on it. This image does not have an alt tag. So real simple, the logo of this site does not have an alt tag. So, if someone that couldn't see came to this site, their screen reader is gonna understand an image exists, they're not gonna know what the image is. And you might say, as someone building a site, that's not a big deal, it's just the logo. They don't know that. It could have been an image that was really important, right? And as we scroll down on this site, there's going to be more. Oh, there we go. What's that? A header tag with no content. So what's going to happen? One of the things that people with disabilities, especially visually impaired, do is they look at all the headings on a page to understand how the page reads, like a Word document. They're going to see a blank one, and it's going to confuse them, right? And it looks like there's a lot over here. Here's a good example of how one mistake can repeat itself, and this is probably where the 28 is coming from this page. Looks like this little component that was built here, every image within Twitter doesn't have an alt tag. So they forgot in the loop to put an alt tag on the image, right? So as you can see, with something like Wave, you just have a little easy checker, 2 seconds. It's a Chrome toolbar. You tap a button. You can catch your issues. This helps me out all the time. I know these rules, but who here is a web developer, writes HTML? Anyone? It becomes thousands and thousands of lines of code of HTML sometimes, depending on the size of your application. It's easy to miss this stuff every once in a while, so these tools are very, very helpful. Okay, let me get my presentation back. Okay, so your developers have done these simple testing tools. They've used some toolbars. Let's go back to that real quick. Use a toolbar like Wave. There's a syntax HTML checker through W3C validators. What that is saying is you've written good HTML. One of the things about accessibility is the better just pure HTML someone writes, the more accessible a website's going to be. So the better web developer you are, the better chance that you have at just getting a closer chance. So you want to run your HTML through the W3C to make sure, because in HTML there's a million ways that it's going to look good, but you could have still wrote it wrong. And that, what happens in maintenance, things become harder, it's harder to maintain the site, weird things happen on different browsers, so running that check is much more than accessibility, it's just, you want to make sure you write good HTML. And lastly, I always tell my developers, use a contrast checker. Just Google contrast checker, there's a million out there, they literally take 2 colors and tell you if there's enough contrast between them. And why is that? If you put light gray text on a white background, there's a lot of people out there that can't see it. There has to be enough contrast. The other way to do it is you can take your browser and turn it to black and white, or to your computer to black and white, and that's another way to check contrast. But I usually just take, if I see anything that even looks close to maybe there's not enough contrast there, just take the 2 colors, pop them in the contrast checker, it'll spit out if there is or not. Then there's advanced testing. This is the next level, right? So that first was just that basic stuff, right? Easy, basic, easy, everyone should be doing it. Next level, you want to actually use the tools that people with disabilities will use, right? So most, I'm not saying all, most accessibility issues are with visually impaired, right? So what visually impaired people use is something called screen readers. They literally just talk the page out to you, right? The most popular screen on the market is JAWS. It's expensive. It's only the most popular because it's been around the longest, really, but people still use it a lot, especially in the government. They like to pay for that and give it to their users. The one that I like is called NVDA. It's open source, right? You can download it. It's free to use. You just have to learn it. It's not that hard to learn. Windows has one called Windows Eyes, which is not that bad. It's a little more newer. NVDA came out before, so I learned a long time ago. That's why I never switched to Windows Eyes. The problem with screen readers is, so everyone here has been through the IE6, IE7, IE8, IE9, where they change it on us every version. Screen readers have the same problem. Like, there's no consistency with them. Like 90% of the stuff works exactly the same way, but there's that little last 5 to 10% is a little different. So a lot of times we just have to pick one and just kind of say, we did all our other best practices, we checked it with this screen reader. If you're in the government, you ask them for a copy of JAWS as a developer, by the way. Because if that's what they're giving out to their users, that's easy. If you're in the public, if you're doing a public website, that's where it becomes a little harder because you don't know what the end user is going to use. So it might help to check on a couple different ones. There's some other tools out there. Dragon, naturally speaking, that's the opposite. That's for people that have trouble with a mouse. They speak to their website to tell it to do certain things. So you want to test stuff like that. Zoom text, being able to zoom in and out of sites, make sure that's still working. And they have text to speech also. There's a lot of tools on the market out there. Typically what I do is I really focus on the screen readers because that's where I catch most of it. If I follow my best practices with the other stuff, and the Dragon, naturally speaking, that's what gets you a little bit because it's very hard to tell sometimes if that link's clickable or if that's hard for someone that's not using a mouse to click, but it's an expensive product and I don't know of an open source alternative for that. And then you have really advanced testing where you actually hire test with disabilities. This is what people that really take this seriously really do. I go to a lot of government agencies and they say, we take 508 seriously. I say, great, where's your 508 testing team? Oh, we don't have a 508 testing, we have a 508 team. Okay, interesting. Where's your 508 team? Oh, they're over there, I go talk to them. They write policy. I'm like, you don't take 508 seriously. You have no tools, you've not provided the ability to do this, right? The really good ones, and there's a few out there, have testers with disabilities or testers that have been trained to use these tools that understand how people with disabilities really use the site. So that's all, in the end, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you hit every check mark on the 508 checklist. It matters if people can use the site, right? But that's super advanced. So we've kind of been going through the levels of advancements from a testing point of view. It always starts with the simple, like, developer kind of toolbars and things to check your site. You move into the automated tools, and then you hire testers. Now, I haven't even mentioned yet what government thinks you're supposed to do. Automated testing tools. There are certain tools out there, and most government agencies have these, that can literally just scan a site and produce a report of 508. They're similar to that toolbar I showed you earlier, but they're a little bit more advanced. You can, right? Yes?
Actually, I don't think either of those exist anymore. They've been rolled into a much more expensive product.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Compliance Sheriff.
Oh, no, yeah, high software is high software compliance sheriff, and yeah. The problem with this is, here's the biggest issue I've seen here. The people start here. This is the last thing. This is the last check. This is like, think of it from a development process. This is UAT almost. Like, you're at the end. You're not supposed to have any issues by the time you get here. The other problem with this is for people to understand the results. It's very similar to that Chrome toolbar that I showed you earlier. It's gonna get errors, and those errors don't always mean they're real errors. It means an automated tool that can only do so much thinks there might be an error here. I literally had one, it was an interesting one. They ran the high software, and the actual tool under high software is called Compliance Sheriff. And they ran it, and it came back with thousands of errors, and everyone was freaking out, so we were about to go live with the website. Once again, it was one error repeated 1,000 times, and it wasn't even a real error. Like, it got confused. Like, the tool got confused with the technique we did. It just wasn't, the tool was a little behind with something called ARIA techniques, which we'll go into in a minute. So I had to walk into the CIO's office and explain that a report's wrong. You know how hard that is? When you got the 508 team that knew nothing about 508 telling them, no, the report's always right. And I got to explain, really, report's always right? Like, virus checkers always catch everything on your computer. You know, tools have issues, especially when you don't upgrade them for 10 years and certain things like that. But anyways, the point here is you're going to probably come across a situation in your once in a while where someone's going to say, how did you verify your site is 508 compliant, right? It's not one answer. It's not, I used high software compliance sheriff. It's not, I used Wave toolbar. It's not, it's, I did all these things. I've done automated testing tools. I've run through it with screen readers. I've run through it with Dragon Naturally Speaking. I've done color contrast checkers. I've done all this stuff, and I'm fairly confident that my site's compliant, right? And that's why I said earlier, there's no such thing as 508 compliant. Because I could have hit all that, and maybe my site still doesn't work on JAWS from 5 versions ago, right? There's just no way you're going to hit everything. And to be quite honest, you don't have to hit everything. Believe me, people with disabilities, like, when they see sites they can understand, they love it, because it's actually few and far between. So if you're not perfect, they don't care. They're like, wow, this is an awesome site. I can actually use this and understand it. So the basic conclusion of the whole testing period is, I've heard this a million times over. Development teams cannot test accessibility because they don't have the right tools or the right testers, right? That is not an excuse. That's an excuse to not doing it perfectly and not being able to go to an executive and say with confidence, you know, yes, just like anything, you want to bring in a professional testing team, you want to go with confidence, but when developers don't do the bare minimum, that's not an excuse. There's so many open source free tools out there, and it's not that hard. So what I tell all my development teams to do, at minimal, I want you checking web toolbars, color contrast checkers, W3 validators, and manual checklists. Every page. That is a go live before we start our testing on any sprint that we run in development. All right, now we're jumping to the code. So, it's all semantics. Semantic HTML means that you're using good HTML. And let me explain what semantic HTML is. So on any website, I can take a div, and I can put a class on it, and I can make it a certain size. And I can take the next div, and I can put a class and make it a little smaller. And I can make it look like headings on a page. That's not semantic HTML. Semantic HTML is using the right tags for the right thing and letting the tags define it. So, for instance, and if I'm writing good HTML, I'm saying all my H1s throughout my website look a certain way. But some people say H1 class equals our custom header. And they put in their CSS our custom header. Well, that's not semantic. You've now associated a class. Semantic HTML is about trying to limit the amount of CSS and classes you're associated with and style your tags and make them work the right way. And this becomes very important in accessibility. So semantic HTML, you want to use headings. That's one of the most important parts of semantic HTML, H1s, H2s, H3s, H4s, right? You want to use lists correctly, ULs, OLs, things like that, right? Think of a document like a Word document. You write a Word document, use headers. Headers build your table of contents. It's the same exact thing with accessibility, right? What is one of the first things that people do that are using screen readers? The first thing they do when they get to your website is they take a look, what are the headings on this page? Where are the lists on this page? Where are the links on this page? And there's special key controls they have that would just tell them that kind of stuff. It's telling them how the page is broken down, just like a table of content would do in a Word document. You don't have that, they're not going to understand how to read your page, and then they're going to have to start reading the whole thing. So when you look at a page, you glance over real quick and understand the section that you want to look at. If headers used correctly, people's screen readers can do the exact same thing. And they don't have to read every single word on a page, they just get to the content they need. Right? Also, you think of it like this really helps with SEO. I don't know anyone here, anyone work in public websites? All right, so SEO, search engine optimization, public websites, being able to find things easy. Google, Bing, everyone, they have worked tirelessly to make people not be able to trick them. How do you not trick them? They have to try to understand how your website works. They use very similar techniques, they have what they call algorithms to read your site, and they're using very similar techniques like screen readers do, where they're looking for certain headings or saying, oh, this was an H1, that must be more important than this H6 down here, or this content was at the top and an H2, that's more important than the content in the H3 down here. So the better your website, more semantic website are, you actually build better public websites too. So. Okay, so pro tip, get a screen reader. I'm going to show you one in a second. You know, if you have JAWS, great. Like I said, if you're at a government agency and they use JAWS and you want to start getting into this, you ask them for it. If you want a free one, I personally like NVDA. Open a page, click Insert F7 MEA, Insert F6, see your header list. Let me show you what I mean real quick. So I'm going to switch back. Okay, so I'm on this web page. Let's just refresh it real quick. Hopefully I still have internet connection. Okay, and I have, hopefully it's still up, NVDA on here. And I'm going to hit Insert F7. Ah, NVDA closed down. Oh, no, it didn't. Here it is. It's on my other screen. And it brought up this list. This is what they do. This is what people, this is literally one of the first things someone with a disability does when they get to your site. People think people with disabilities get to a site and start tabbing through it. No, they do this first. So this will read out all the links on the site if they care. The headings, you want this to read like a book, just like a table of contents. And landmarks. I don't have any on here right now, but that's different kinds of text. Typically, what I've noticed is they really like to use the headings, right, when they do this, because they're going to jump to the portion of the page. So one thing I always do is I load up one of these screen readers and I load up my headings. I had a complicated page the other day I was building. It had tabs within tabs, and the designers went crazy, and visually it looked really good. And I said, oh my God, how is this going to work 508? And when I brought up the headings list, it just did not look good. So what we did is we put hidden headings in there. And it's a real simple trick. You drop a heading into the page, you put a CSS class, you call it something like hide, and you use some CSS tricks. You say index negative 9999, it basically puts it off the page, so you can't see it. But the screen readers will still read it, and it can help them navigate through the page, right? So anyways, the point is, with this little pro tip, getting one of these screen readers and hitting Insert F6 or Insert F7, you can kind of see how people really start on a page. And I think the start's the most important thing. How do they start using a page, right? Because after they figure out where they're going, the next step is going to be actually reading the content. Once they start reading the content, really what they're doing is they're tabbing through the page at that point. So they jump to the section of the page they want to go to, then they start tabbing through the links, and then it starts reading the content as they go down. Right? Okay, so I want to do a little quiz real quick. We're going to take some of the stuff we've learned today. I'm going to ask some questions. Okay, very simple. Alt tags on images. Right? We talk about this, put an alt tag in an image. putting an alt tag on an image does not make it acceptable. And this is where those automated testing tools cannot help you. They can tell you if there's an alt tag on an image or not. They can't tell you if that alt tag on an image actually means anything or not. So take a look at this picture. Context is everything, right? What you want to think about when you're putting alt text, does the image present content or does the image have function, right? FYI, typically image have function that's presented with a link. So is there surrounding text around the image? Right, and that's important because if it's just an image with no, if there's surrounding text like you're putting like a figure in a table in a document, right? That text can help explain the image too. So we're going to do this real quick. This is what you see on a web page in the blue box at the top, or is that gray or blue? Okay, real quick. What would the appropriate alternative text be? Image of George Washington, the first president of the United States, an empty alt tag, and by the way, I'm going to give you a hint. It's not the empty alt tag. I'm going to tell you why you can put that in there. Empty alt tag, that's the trick when you really don't want it to read the image of someone, right? You're allowed to put empty alt tags. So if you had like, it's typically best practice when you have an image that's purely designed to make it a background image, not like a foreground, but if for some reason you had to make a foreground image that was purely designed, had no meaning, you don't just leave the alt tag off, you put an empty alt tag. It tells someone that that was done for a purpose, right? Okay, anyway, so C's not the answer. All right, we only have 3 choices. So who thinks I know this? What is the right answer? A? A?
D.
I think B.
B? B?
Last.
D. Anyone know why? Yes?
Well, it's already going to say graphic.
Exactly.
George Washington, so graphic and then image of. is-
Exactly, so that's why it's not A. You don't have to say image of. They know it's an image, right? Think about it. Screen readers are reading a web page. How annoying is it if you're putting just useless stuff for them to read? Like, has anyone ever heard a screen reader? I'll play one for you after this. I mean, it's not the most pleasant voice computer. It's the true, I think, 1980s war games computer talking to you, right? Okay, so then we already talked about why C's not it. I gave you the hint there. So why is B? Does anyone know?
Context of the text is
Yeah.
Context of the text, it's too
Relevant.
much information, right? The image is George Washington. The image is not like him being inaugurated into office or anything. So it's just too much information. Once again, you're trying not to annoy them. You're just trying to get the point across. We all see it visually. We see George Washington, straight to the point. Let's try another one. All right, so everyone read through this real quick. Tell me what you think the correct one would be here for the alt tag. Just speak it out when you think you got it.
C.
Got a C? Anyone else? Okay, we're going with C, everyone? Okay. C. Okay. George Washington, A. Not enough. This is not a picture of George Washington. He is in it. It is not a picture of him. You don't have to say something. Well, painting of George Washington is true, but it's very similar to just the George Washington. It's not enough. C has the correct amount of context to exactly explain what it is without getting way too wordy like D and E. You don't need to put a classic painting or anything like that, right? Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is tab indexes. This is a very important part of Wix that a lot of people don't understand. So we talked about earlier, someone with a screen reader particularly, they're coming to a site, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to bring up their list of headings to try to get to the part of the site. Once they're in the part of the site they want to be in, they use tabs to get around. Tabs and arrow keys, mostly, right? So websites understand tabs and arrow keys with this thing called a tab index. Some elements just get it automatically, you don't have to worry about it, like anchor tags and things like that, right? Some you can legitimately put it on. The key here is there's 3 things you can do in tab index. You can have tab index 1 or greater. That's basically you're setting the tab order on your page. This is very rare you ever want to do this. I highly recommend you don't do it unless you have a really good reason. What you really want to do is tab index 0 and negative 1. So tab index 0 is what most people know. And what this means is, let's say you had an element like a div, and you wanted it to be able to be focusable by the end user. So anchor tags are focusable by end user. If someone hits tab, it's going to tab to all the links on the page. let's say you had a div on the page and you wanted that to be focusable for whatever legitimate reason you have to put tab index 0 on it. That means someone on the page can tab to it. Tab index -1, that means it's going to receive programmatic focus. So the end user can't tab to it, but in code behind the scenes, you could set it. That becomes important in some like, so everyone here is familiar with jQuery UI, you have accordions and their tabs. They do a lot of this where the end user might not be clicking on it, but behind the scenes, they're focusing stuff for you to make it more accessible, right? So anyways, this is a good example of why you don't want to use tab index and put actual full numbers in there. So in this example, the cited user would see services, articles, resources, community, right? But the screen reader would read articles, resources, service, community. Now this goes right back to a point we made really early on. You want the cited user and the non-cited user to have the same exact thing. So this would actually change the order for the different type of people, right? Because you'd see it in one order, but it would tab through in a different order, and that's bad. So when we use tab index, never use them on what we call form elements, inputs, links, buttons, they already have it. Anything that you would interact with on a website already has the tab index 0 set on it by default. Use specifically for layout elements, divs and spans, when you want them to act like a form element, right? So an example, so think of jQuery tabs. So now we're talking about real tabs, not tab index. Think about jQuery tabs, like, or an accordion is even a better term. Think of an accordion. That each panel of the accordion, you can, that's a div. So in that case, you'd have to, the programmer would have to put a tab index 0 on that just so they can be tabbed through, because divs don't get them by default like links do. Okay, this is a really important one that I see missed all the time, and it's so easy. Whenever you are building a form, and since we're all working in business, we build forms a lot, and you have an input box, you have to put a label and associate them together. That way, when someone with a screen reader tabs into the input box, it reads the label. If you don't have that for matching the ID, when they tab into the input box, they have no clue what it's for, right? So this is missed all the time, and it's very important. SharePoint is getting better about this out of the box. When does this become important? Let's just say you're using JS Link for SharePoint. JS Link's a client-side technology. We can change how the form acts in SharePoint. If you're starting to build this, you have to remember to do it. Or if you're building a client-side framework or whatever you might be building on a web page, right? Okay, so a couple tips. And by the way, I could probably do a whole weekend class on everything you need to know. I'm going through the really important ones that, you know, if you catch these, it's really good. So we've gone through some of the basic ones. Now we're going to go into this thing called ARIA. It stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's technically WAI ARIA. It's part of W3C, created it when they were creating it. So anyways, basically when AJAX came about, and we were able to really change the way a web page works through the client side without posting back every time, web accessibility went out the door. Like, think about it. I click a button and some pop-up comes up. Well, if I didn't see the screen, I didn't see the pop-up come up, how do I know the pop-up came up? Or I click a button and an error message shows at the top. Well, how do I know that happened? There's all kinds of different things. So they came up with this thing called ARIA. And ARIA are these special tags you can put into HTML that are specifically there to tell screen readers to do certain things, right? The visual person will not see them. They're very useful when you have complicated designs. So, the first thing are ARIA roles. You can actually, within any element, tell it what type of element it is. And this is very helpful. As we get more creative in our designs, we make things look different. We make divs look like tabs. We make divs look like accordions. We make divs look like this, right? You can put a role and say what it is. Now I'm going to give you an example of this that makes it a really good example, but it's one you would never do in real life, right? So this is the equivalent of doing a UL and LI to create a list. You can actually put role equals list, and for every div, put role equals list item. It's going to read to the screen reader like a list would, just because it has these special role tags in it. Now these role tags provide no other purpose other than to tell the screen reader what these sections are. Right? ARIA alerts. This is another role. This is a role that I use a lot. And this is a problem I see on almost every custom website I've ever seen. Validation. Someone hits save. You somehow show them there's an error on the page. You put something at the top of the page, a pop-up at the bottom. This is a huge problem because the person that can't see hit the save button, thinks they saved, leaves. They don't know an error happened. So just by putting role alert, the screen reader is going to say, alert, and they're going to focus the content to there so you can read it. Just like we get an alert through putting red boxes on things and knowing there's a problem. All right? So it's a very important one. Menu. SharePoint has this, by the way, if you look through their menu structure, or jQuery menus has this, but if you're building your own menu, it's very important. You have to label everything in the menu with their role. Now, this is also where some other things come into play. This is more ARIA. Has pop out, ARIA labeled by, and an ID. So just like inputs had, part of HTML, the input and the label had a for tag. If you didn't have an input or label, ARIA has a special thing to say this LI, which for tag's not part of HTML and LIs, but you can say labeled by and tell what's labeled. That way when someone gets to this list, it's going to read to them, you have a list, call it file. You see, it's telling them what the list is for, so they know. And then the pop-up is just saying when they click this, a pop-up's going to happen. So they're expecting it when they click on the menu. So almost all good menus are structured this way. If you download any reputable third-party tools, they're structured this way. Like I said, jQuery menu, the SharePoint menu system has it in it now. Didn't back in the earlier versions. But if you ever have to modify the menu, you need to remember these rules. Okay, I always like to bring up tabs as one of like the ultimate accessibility problem. There's just so much going on with tabs, right? It brings a lot of the concepts together that we've been talking about. So first of all, with tabs, you have to use ARIA roles. So you have to say, hey, this is a tab list, and each one of the individual tabs is a tab, and the panel they open is a tab panel. You have to use ARIA controls to associate the tab to the tab panel. So you say this tab controls this tab panel. You have to use ARIA selected to show which tab is currently selected. You have to use those tab index we talked about so people can actually tab through them. You have to use JavaScript to change the tab index and the ARIA selected when the tabs change. And you have to provide keyboard navigation using arrow keys. So if you get a third-party tool like jQuery tabs, it does all this for you. If you don't, let me show you what you can do. And you have to do it all yourself. So this is CodePen. It's a nice little tool for seeing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all together in one. And so what you have to do is over here, you'll see that this is a simple accessible tabs. I didn't build this, someone else did, but they did a good job, so I used it in my presentation. You'll notice down here they have their UL, their LI, their anchor. So this is building these tabs down here that you can click through. And what they've done over here in the JavaScript is they've done all that stuff I was talking about. But look at the amount of JavaScript it took just to make that tab work. Right? So anyways, if you ever want to do this, if you ever said, I need to create a tab, what I always suggest to people is use a third-party tool to put all the thought into this, especially a reputable one. If not, if you, for some reason you have to build it yourself, Google accessible tabs, simple accessible tabs, or if you have this presentation, I put a link right down in the bottom corner. Just you got to think through all that stuff. Like, I literally just had a project the other day where it was our job to come into a website that has been in existence for 5 years and make it accessible. And I said, how long will it take? And I said, I have no clue. You have to let me see the HTML. They said, why do you have to see the HTML? I said, this might be a simple thing of going through and making sure all your alt tags, or this might be rewriting all your code. Sure enough, they use a lot of tabs, none of them have keyboard navigation. We spent months rewriting all those things, putting JavaScript in, making sure keyboard navigation worked and everything. So you gotta be very careful with those. Some resources. All right, so I put some links in here for you. The ARIA techniques that we talked about, you can go here to the WCAG. It is in w3.org. That is the official place to go to get all your ARIA techniques. That's the World Wide Web Consortium, right? This was a really nice website I found that has a matrix. So everyone here understands with HTML, different elements have different things you can do. So with images, you can have a source. But you can't have a source with, the source tells where the image file lives. With a div, you can't have a source, it doesn't count. The same thing's true with ARIA, certain tags only work on certain elements. And sometimes understanding that is kind of hard to remember. So what I like about this website, sorry, I need to click on it. The thing I like about this website is they put this nice little table together. And you can literally go down, you know, find, I scroll too far, but you can find different elements. There's the article element, which is one of the new, you can say these are the only ARIA roles that would work on that element. So it's really easy, because one of the things that gets a little tricky with ARIA sometimes is there's a few things that sound very similar, like described by and controlled by and things like that. And sometimes you forget which one you use. So what I usually just do is just say, okay, I understand this is going to be a problem. There's no way someone that can't see the screen is going to understand what this is. I want to put an ARIA tag on it. I go to that matrix. I find what I'm working with. I see what's available, and I see what makes sense. Pretty simple like that. The other thing I do is when I'm building a component, I usually just Google, like especially with like tabs, accordions, anything fancy I'm building, I just usually Google accessible, whatever, and I try to find the article written in this link, and then I try to find if anyone's done an example of it, because a lot of people out there have. Here's the link to the Wave toolbar if you want to get that. It has the Chrome and Firefox extension on it. Here's a link to NVDA if you want to download that. In a second, we have some time, so I'll let you hear what NVDA sounds like and go through a site real quick. But these are all, this is the Open Ajax Alliance. So this has more examples of accessibility things. So they've taken a lot of the concepts from here and built a lot of examples, so you can actually just get the code and write it. Lastly, before I jump in, we're gonna end with some screen reader demos so you can see how these work. But if you need to get in contact with me, there's my email, ggallipeau@repointtech.com. You can visit our website, and if you submit a site contact there, it'll get to me. And well, I'm always open to help people and answer questions if you have any specific.
Are we able to get the slides?
Yeah. First of all, there is a video, so you can actually watch the video. But are we putting the slides up too? Do you know?
Did you post the slides?
Not yet, but I can.
Okay.
I'll post them to the website.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll post them to the site. You can get them right from there. I'll do it right after
Thank
this.
you.
Sure.
So we use on YouTube?
I don't. They're filming it right now, so. Where are they going to put it? Do you know?
I think they're putting most of them on Vimeo.
Okay. So before I jump into NVDA, so you can see, hear it, see it, let's start with questions before I jump into that. Any questions? Yes.
So SharePoint specifically,
Yes.
you say it is getting, each version gets a little more accessible as we're going on
Yes.
out of the box. Are there still things that don't work that we should
Yes.
avoid?
That's a very good question. Okay, so with SharePoint, Microsoft puts something called a VPAT out every year. You can just search for the Google for SharePoint VPAT. VPAT stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. This is where companies, and any big product does this, and you should probably do it for any, if you're building custom applications too, by the way. You say what is wrong with the product and what the workaround is. So if you read the SharePoint VPAT, some of the stuff's gonna be really small, and you're gonna say, we don't really care about it, we don't use that, right? And some of it's gonna be like, don't use this particular thing, right? Some of the older technologies that incorporate with SharePoint solve some bigger problems. InfoPath can be pretty tricky sometimes to make accessible. Now, the problem with InfoPath that I found is the label input association. There is something in InfoPath. If you right-click on a control and you go to properties, there is a way to put some alt text in there. It's not the best. It doesn't do the label input association like I would love it to, but it's good enough that someone can understand an InfoPath form. But there are some advanced stuff in InfoPath. So Microsoft lays it all out in the VPAT. The thing I would say is it's not really SharePoint that has the problems now. It's the other stuff SharePoint has incorporated. Visio services, if you're still using Excel services, things like that have some interesting side effects. You want to, if you're using any of those advanced integrations into SharePoint, you definitely want to read the VPAT and see if something you've done has issues. If it has issues, you want to say, is there a different way we could have done it? Is there maybe, like I gave you the example earlier with the issue we had at Treasury with the data and the charts, and there's no way. Is there a secondary way we can point people to get the same information? You want to think like that. So, any other questions? But it is getting better, and that VPAT gets less every time I read it. So.
And it's an honest VPAT, which you don't see very often.
They are very honest. So Microsoft got dinged pretty bad in 2007 with their accessibility in SharePoint. And they've been making efforts to make it better. And 2010 was actually not great either. 2013 was the first version I saw where I felt like they finally got to a point where it's actually usable when you're using some of the advanced tools in the product. But when it was starting in 2007 where they started getting really honest with their VPAT, and I think the 2010 one was great. They really laid out all their problems, almost too much where it scared some of my clients. But in the 2013 one's shrunk a little bit. Any other questions? Yes.
So is there any difference now between regular SharePoint on-prem or SharePoint online?
Only that, it depends on the version of on-prem you have. So SharePoint Online is putting incremental updates out. And Microsoft's been actually really good about everything coming out now is pretty accessible, right? So I can't speak to a complete one-to-one comparison because it could be different in a week, especially with, they just had the Build conference and they announced some small changes. But the one thing I can tell you is every time they put something out, this is one of the first things I look at, and I haven't seen anything come out in a while that hasn't been accessible. They must have that down pretty good internally with their teams looking at this stuff before they put it out. So.
Very improved.
Yeah, it's very improved, and they're just, we talk about semantic HTML, the semantic HTML SharePoint's getting much better. It's not perfect in my opinion, but the old SharePoint used to have just layers of divs inside divs forever to make it look the way, and they've got much better at that. One of the things in SharePoint that, there is something you should think about, we didn't talk about it a lot today, tables. There's two types of tables in HTML, one that makes the page look the way you want it to look, and one that's an actual table of data, and SharePoint uses tables of data a lot. So tables of data, one of the things you want to do is have summary tags on it to explain what that table is, and SharePoint auto-populates that stuff when you start putting good descriptions on your list. So if you don't skip some of that stuff. I mean, also in SharePoint, obviously, you're putting images up, you want to set the alt tags, right? And that's all in the ribbon. I mean, there's things, don't skip over that stuff, is what I'm saying. So if you're dropping an image on a page, go to the ribbon, set the alternative text, right? If you're putting a list on a page, put the description in. Now, I would say you should have done that anyways, because that's good for your end users. It's just a good website when you do that. Put descriptions in your site, put descriptions in your list. But they actually use that stuff to dynamically build their HTML, so you want to keep that in mind also when you're just configuring SharePoint. Other questions? Anyone want to see what MVDA is like? All right.
Yes.
Hopefully, I brought, I usually do all my presentation on a Surface, but they didn't have the right display ports here, so we're going to cross our fingers that the volume is good on this laptop. So. Okay, hopefully you can hear it. So that's what they have to listen to. So watch this. I'm going to start. I came to our website, right? Let's just say I start tabbing through it. So you hear what it said? Clickable list with 4 items, right? So this was built as a list and it has 4 items in it. That's important for someone that's navigating the site to understand, right? Then just hit tab again. Clickable about link. They know it's a link, they know it's clickable, they know what it says, right?
Clickable events link.
Clickable events link. So this is what they're going to do. They're going to tab through this, especially the menu.
Clickable community link.
Clickable community link. So if you built a bad menu and you had NVDA or Windows Eyes or JAWS on your computer and you literally just tab through, you know real quick you have a bad menu, right?
Out of list clickable sided link.
So do you hear what it did there? It said out of list first. It's telling the person I've left the list and now I've clicked into something else. So they now know they're out of the menu, right? Now this particular site, it would have said something different if that menu had the ARIA role menu. It just said list. So the person kind of had to assume it was a menu, but that's a pretty good, these people are pretty good with assuming things based on website structures.
Search all sites, set it alt plus S, selected search all sites.
So search all sites, it says, selected.
Clickable navigation graphic, clickable link navigation. Search graphic, clickable link search.
Search graphic, clickable link search. That's how they know that's the button I have to hit when I search. So focuses are important too, because what a lot of people do when they get into the search box, they just think they can hit the enter key. So you want to make sure, if you're doing anything fancy, you want to make sure that the things focus the right way when something gets focused into, right? Now, also people with disabilities, they learn real quick what the quirks are in a product like SharePoint, right? Once search doesn't work with an enter link once, they're never going to try it again. Because they're like, okay, they didn't do that, we have to actually click to the icon. They learn real quick what the workarounds are.
So on that previous one, just to the left of it, it said something about navigate.
Navigation graphic, clickable link navigation.
Navigation, graphic, clickable link, navigation.
So how would the disabled user click that?
Then hit enter now.
And what would it do on this page?
Nothing, that's a problem right now. They should be able to hit enter and it would drop down.
Okay, so the reader doesn't tell you there's a mistake in the functionality, it just
No.
tells you what it is.
It just tells you what it is. The end user knows that the clickable link, I should be able to hit enter. If nothing happened, they know there's a problem on the site, right?
Search clickable.
So notice it went to the next focused tabbed link. So this was the next, even though you had all this was the next thing on the page that I could actually navigate to, right? Now, by the way, I started tabbing through the page. It would have actually just started reading the content of the page if I didn't start tabbing through it. So what they do a lot is they come, they find their headers, they find the right side of the page, they tab through the page once, then they might come back. So you could easily say here, you know, this probably could have had a header on top of it that said location, would have made it really easy for them to know what this content was for. So when they brought their heading list up, it would have been easier than just having to read the whole page, right? So that's why I said before, there's levels of accessibility. Like I could make, even fixing the errors in this page, I could still make it more accessible by thinking through how someone with the screen reader would use the page. If I was doing this, I would put a hidden tag right here that said date and location information, right? So the person brought their header list up, they would have saw date and location information, because just this morning, when I needed to get directions here, I was looking for date and location information. I saw it, but it was right there. They would have had to read all the content on the page just to get that little information. So the more headings you can put, even if you don't want the visual, like I said, you create one CSS class called hide, that's what I usually do, that hides it in an accessible way, puts it off the screen, but it's still there. We don't see it, but it still helps with the headings of the page. There wasn't a lot of headings on this page, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that we brought the headings list up earlier. There was only 2. So that would have, if I'm someone using a screen reader, I would have really quickly said, not a lot of headings on this page, gotta read the whole content. And that's annoying. So, all right, let's keep going through this page.
Clickable repo link. Clickable FAQ page link.
and then clickable F. Now, this said clickable read more link. That's not very helpful. We could have put some extra stuff there to explain more. The FAQ one was helpful. Oh, great, there's the FAQ page. I know how to get to it, right?
Clickable Twitter follow button frame. Clickable follow at SDS event slip. Out of frame. Clickable FB colon like Facebook social plugin frame. Clickable like 634 button like SDS event.
It's just reading off everything in the button. I'm going to skip over that.
Out of frame. Clickable.
Now it's going to go through all this whole Twitter thing here. So at this person, the person's going to give up. I'm in a Twitter box. I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to go back and try to get to the next header and read what's in that. But you can see how the lack of headers on this page made that hard. Because there wasn't a lot of headers on this page, the person just can't say, that's annoying for this infinite list of Twitter stuff. Let's go to the next header and see what's in there. They'd have to find another way out of that. So the lack of headers on this page. So this is a great example of a page. If we fixed those couple issues I showed you earlier with image alt tags, it would have passed every 508 check under the sun. But it wouldn't have been usable. It would have been usable, just annoying. So I want to keep coming back to the fact I hate when people say, is your site 508 compliant? No, my site's accessible, and I'm trying to make it more accessible all the time. Right? That's the goal here. Make usable sites. And you can see, it's not that hard just to tab through a page with this on, listen what's going on, bring the header list up. That's important. So remember, once again,
Elements list dialog.
oh, hold on a second.
Desktop elements list. Elements list.
So it's like
Type.
elements list.
Filter by. Edit activate.
I can tab through the elements list. So, like, this is very important. I think if you didn't learn anything else during this,
Type.
learn about
Edit radio button. Press
the headings and how to navigate around the page, right? Getting alt tags on the images, just the basics. Just make the page easy to use. I mean, it's not. Just try to put your head in someone else's. Like, what's this saying? Put your head in someone else's shoes. Put your feet in someone else's shoes. Whatever that saying is. Just try to think like someone else. I mean, I've heard people say close your eyes. I mean, I can't do that personally. I mean, I still have to see it, but I can still understand why something would be difficult. Like, that would be difficult to navigate a page if that's the only headings I had on it. I always try to relate it back to a table of contents in a Word document. Like, how people, you think about when you're building a Word document, how to build your table of contents, try to think about the same thing with headings on a page. And it's important, just so you know, that web parts on SharePoint pages build headings. So they're going to be able to navigate around the different web parts on your page through the use of the headings. So I've seen people sometimes hide the SharePoint web part heading and try to get real fancy with their style of a different, like they put a content editor box and try to put a heading in there, but you've just actually hurt accessibility if you didn't actually put that in the right way, because you kind of took out what SharePoint was doing to help you navigate around the page. Great. Any other questions?
I forget, how did you bring that elements list up?
In NVDA it's insert F6, in JAWS insert F7, but it's also in the slides. So if you do get the slides and you do want to use one of these tools, I wrote it in there for you.
So the person who installs one of these, they know what keystrokes they use to start the tool.
So here's a couple tips if you install one of these. In the beginning, it's going to ask, do you want to run it at start? Check no. This is the most annoying sound in the world. It runs every time your computer opens. Just check no, that way you can just bring it up when you want to do it. Great. So, looks like we're just about out of time anyways. Please fill out your